Hello, everybody. Welcome to this space. Today, I have a very special guest. Um, my guest today was also my coach, so I know her work firsthand, and she's also my friend, and she's also a Latina woman in this business. So we have so much to talk about. She's Isha is a trauma psychologist, somatic-expressive energy alchemist. She's the founder of Revolutionary Rompereglas, which I love the name of your program, an online healing and coaching business. Through movement, breath, and sound, Isha helps healers, connectors, and bridge builders decolonize. And that's precisely what we're going to be talking about today, decolonization and trauma. Welcome, Isha. It's so lovely to have you here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So
Yeah.
excited.
Thank you. So, um, I love that Isha has a very somatic approach to trauma. That's something that I really want to ask you about to start with. What does it mean to talk about? I'm sorry. What does it mean to speak about um, decolonization and trauma? Those are two terms that I am particularly interested. And the somatic approach to trauma. What does it mean?
So, with in terms of decolonizing through the body, there's a lot of ways that people use the word decolonization, and I want to be considerate of indigenous folks, especially those indigenous to North America and South America, Central America, talking about how the process of colonization. I want to be considerate of that. So the way that I understand the process of trauma is the process of how our systems of strife and power that exist in the world, the way that we are parented, the way that we are conditioned into certain belief systems, those are all imposed upon the body. Those are all ways that the, our bodies are settled with belief systems. And so that's the way that I understand the process of like peeling off these layers of what has been imposed upon, what is covering up the true self, the core self or the spirit self, and our life force energy. So that's how I think of it, as a process of like peeling away all of these layers. So decolonizing our minds, right? Like training our brains to work in service of us, not against us.
Mhm.
Decolonizing our bodies and decolonizing even spirit, in the sense of like, how do you conceptualize the God self, right? How do you conceptualize God? Is it something that lives outside of you, or is it something that lives within? Does it have a gender? All of those things are what I bring into to the therapeutic space, or the coaching space. And in terms of trauma, um, the way that I understand trauma, and I usually work with young wounds, is too much, too fast, too soon. So
Mhm.
this is what Peter Levine of somatic experiencing came up with as a way to help us conceptualize trauma beyond the normal shock trauma that we understand. That even in the slightest small moments of life, that can be trauma. And
Mhm.
our conditioning and socialization is also a form of trauma, because it separates us from our real self.
Yes, I love that, and I totally agree. I have the very same view during my training. It's because it's deeply somatic, and that is the power that lies in that acknowledgement, right? Like how our bodies have been holding on to that expression, to those layers, and they keep us from our true essence.
Yeah. And because we are energy beings. And I really, when I talk about somatics, yes, I'm talking about our muscular armoring, the way our bodies are shaped. But I'm also talking about like just energetic patterns that we hold in the body, the ways that we like learn to move and relate to ourselves, to one another. And that is all energetically patterned. Our first relationships are with our caregivers, and those are imperfect relationships, but those are the relations, that's the way we learn to relate to ourselves and to other people and the world even. And so these pattern, it's like a matrix that lives within us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, totally. And then comes another part that is so important, which is why, of all the people that I know, I invited you to this podcast, and it's because we are both Latinas. Of
Yeah.
course, because I admire your work and I know it firsthand, and I deeply appreciate you. But there is also a common component here, which is both being Latina women. And in that sense, I think that you and I can have a conversation about colonization, uh, and take it to a deeper space, because there is a kind of colonization that all women experience because we have been colonized by patriarchy, all human experience because we have been colonized by our culture, but then Latin American women and indigenous women experience because we have been colonized by foreign cultures. So that's something that I really want to discuss, because I think that our voices need to be heard a little bit more. We are too used to listening to white coaches, white thought leaders, and that's okay. I mean, yeah, there are so many amazing thought leaders out there, but we need to start speaking up and gathering around women of color, because for way too long we have been a little bit too kept in the corner, and I would really love to discuss the experience of dealing with the trauma of being a Latina. Like, have you seen, or could you describe how it changes from the experience of like being a Latina and not a Latina, and if there is a specific trauma around us?
You know, um, it's in this case, it's I can speak from my own experience, and then I can speak from the experience of the people that I've seen in my practice. Is, from my own experience, I've come to recognize, I didn't realize that it was there, but as I was working through my personal trauma, I reached a place after doing 4 years of very intensive work. I got to a place where I recognized that the trauma that I was dealing with at some point was collective, that it was no longer just personal to me, but that it felt like it was this understanding of myself, like within the system that I had grown up in. And it came out in the smallest ways, like even like giving myself permission to have authority to share my wisdom,
Yes.
and being like, yes, I can step into my leadership, which is why I'm obsessed with leadership and supporting women of color, and stepping into their leadership, because we don't give ourselves that authority because the system doesn't give us that authority. And at some point I said, I have value to offer. I have something to give, and I want to give it. I want to share it. And so that process of coming into that self-trust has been hard won. It's been hard for me. And I do a lot of work around like allowing myself, giving myself that authority, but doing it with a sense of humility. But it came, like the wall that I came up against was because you grew up in this little island that nobody cares about. Like, who are you to, to have anything to say? And I know that those belief systems exist in white women as well. So I'm not going to pretend that that doesn't exist. The quality, the flavor of it was uniquely like colonial Puerto Rican. It felt very unique to how I had grown up.
Yeah, totally. That is something that I have found as well. Oh my God, I even run out of voice. You know that
Woo!
you know, we know, like, yes, daring
Yes.
to speak up as a Latina
Yes.
in a world that it's still struggling to see us and to stop referring to us as minorities, which we are not minorities.
Right.
But that reference to us as minority comes from the fact of seeing Caucasian people as the norm and the
Yes.
rest of the world as the foreign, when in
Yes.
reality the world is made of diversity.
Yeah.
We actually, there are more inhabitants of the world that are not white than those that are white.
Yes.
But it's like, to become a leader, you have to be playing in the game with white women for whom success has a very specific set um, of rules. It's like, you know that a white woman is successful because you know she's all about the luxury and about the fine clothes and the travel. And but you know that a Latina woman is successful because she dared to speak up, and just that, like, she
Yeah.
dared to speak up in a
Yeah.
culture where we are not encouraged to speaking up.
Yes. Yes. No, and I love that you touched your throat because that has been like a big deal. Uncovering the throat, like unblocking the throat, like daring to speak the truth when our ancestors, like the whole point of the subjugation of our indigenous heritage, or our yeah, our ancestors, was to suppress the truth, suppress the knowledge, suppress the practices, annihilate them essentially. And that epigenetically lives in ourselves. That is our some of our deepest knowing, is the understanding that we shouldn't bring our medicine, that it's dangerous to bring our medicine.
Right. And it's literally dangerous. I mean,
Yes.
I know that white women speak a lot about, this is not against white women. I adore white women. I mean, of course, it's not against them. But I'm just trying to signal the differences between the challenges that we both deal with. They speak about how endangered they feel about sharing their knowledge because there was a time when they were born in the stick on the stick for doing that, and they were, and that's truth, and that lives in their bodies. But for Latina women, that is still going on.
Hmm.
That didn't happen 200 years ago. That happened yesterday to the woman that was just murdered for fighting for female rights in
Yes.
Chihuahua or Sonora. You know, like,
Yes.
we
Yes.
know that that is a challenge that we are facing still today, that
Right.
we are not processing from our ancestors, that we're processing from the present.
Yes. Yes. And it's not to say that femicide doesn't exist in the United States. It's just like the intensity and the degree to which it is happening is extreme. It's dire. It is, like you said, right now, and it's urgent.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. I was just sharing that I dared to start my business as sexuality coach when I moved to Merida because I knew that I would be safer here that
Mm,
than in the city that I love and grew up with
yeah.
which is Mexico City. And I knew that I would be in danger in my own city. And even as I moved to Merida, I don't write down where I am at. I am not like, oh, look, I am in Merida. Look at the places. Look at my house. Look at there is this feeling of cautiousness because we know that the danger is super present right now.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and especially the way that you talk about sexuality, the way that you teach about sexuality is subversive.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
subversive. It is subversive to all of the systems, right, that are in effect and in operation.
And that it has to do with challenging patriarchy, with challenging the system, and it they don't take that fondly. They don't really love that we're challenging them. I, I was just reading uh, uh, some comments on the news of some women that were um, every March 8th, women come to the streets demanding safety in Mexico and in Latin
Yeah.
America because of the number of feminicides. And women drew on a monument, and there were people commenting that they wanted to burn them alive, that they wanted to murder them. Like, oh my gosh, if I had seen them, I would have just set them on fire. It was like, they are speaking about that openly in the comment section with their name and address, and it's not even some distant troll with a fake account. It's somebody
Right, right.
that has a name and a surname and speaks about burning women because they dare to draw on a monument. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I don't even have words right now to, I'm just feeling that as you're talking about it. I'm just, whew.
And
Yeah,
that has been the reality. And for me, that is the challenge that yes, we are speaking about leadership, but for us, leadership is about survival and then about growth and expansion. But when the pyramid of Maslow, oh my gosh, I have never said this aloud in a podcast. But I remember that during my training as a sexuality coach, there was this module in which I broke down and I was really upset because they showed us the pyramid of Maslow, which I already know, and I know that you know, right? Like they say, until you have safety, you can have this other, and then you have this other, and then you have self growth. Um, and I was thinking, no, for Latinas and for people with marginalized personalities, with marginalized what's the name?
identities.
Thank you, identities. Uh, we have to look for self-development and safety at the same time because we
Yes,
will never actually really know have that part figured out. We don't really have safety, but we
yes,
cannot be stuck in safety forever because otherwise we wouldn't be able to look for the other parts of the pyramid, which is
right.
self growth. So we have to have safety and this other safety and
Right.
right. And I think that is such a difference between one culture and the other. That's what happens with colonization. We have to
Yeah,
learn how to thrive and at the same time keep struggling for our safety.
yeah, yeah. And you know that Maslow stole that from Native American people.
Wow.
That's another, that's another layer. Yeah, that was actually taken from, I don't know what people he was working with, but he took that from a nation of indigenous folks. But yes, like I think that you're right. Like, when I talk about safety, it's like we're not guaranteed safety,
Yeah.
right? We're not, especially not as in marginalized identities. And part of the trauma healing work is to be able to access safety within yourself, access the safety of nervous system regulation and co-regulation, right? So that you can respond to any given situation from your center, from your truth, from your leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the arena that we're working in, and we want to acknowledge, right? Because I think that a lot of, you know if you don't have a systems perspective, you're going to miss, you're going to be attributing to this one person, like, oh, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? Well, there are real reasons why we don't do certain things, because we don't feel safe in a bigger sense, in a more global collective sense. And that's important to acknowledge, even though you can't do anything about it. it's important to acknowledge it as part of the whole picture.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up because um, I think that is so important how we live that as a community and how to also access safety from within our bodies, which I think that is something that we really need to discuss a little bit more. And I just went somewhere because I remember my grandmother. There was this moment in which I told her about I knew a woman that was even older than her back then in the bus, and she was so happy and so full of radiance. And she told me that she was going to this place where she was having conversations with other women her age, and they were building things together, and they were teaching whatever they knew. Like she was very good doing stuff with her hands, and she was teaching that to others. And women that were good at cooking were teaching cooking classes, and so they would spend time working together. And she was radiant, she was full of light. So I came back home and I shared with my grandmother, and I told her, Granny, you have to go to this place as well. I know how lonely you feel. You will be able to enjoy this. And she said, oh no, social clubs are for people that are not stressed about anything in life. I have too many things that worry me right now. I have to figure out what I'm gonna do to cook, to feed you all. And I was like, no, you don't. Leave that to us and to my mom, and you go and have some time for community in this social club. And she didn't want to because she said, I don't have time to waste seated by a pool talking to other women. And at the end of her life, she ended up feeling very sad and particularly lonely. And I always wonder if her life would have ended up differently had she gone and had she connected with other people, had she created community. But her survival mechanism wouldn't allow her to. So uh, when we're speaking about surviving, I think that the wrong idea that culture makes us have is that we first have to have this figured out, and later on we can think about bonding, and later on we can think about finding love, and later on but in reality we need to, as you just mentioned, first create safety inside and create community and work with community, because we cannot do this on our own, and we cannot wait until everything is done and perfect to move to the next stage in the ladder.
Yeah, as you're talking, what's coming up for me is that, you know, when I talk about, you know, trauma healing and evolving the self, you know, the parts of ourself, like our spirit selves and even our shadow selves, or our masks, right? The social mask that we show the world. We're always sort of moving back and forth through them, right? It's not like, oh, you're in your mask and you stay in your mask, or even when you've done a lot of work, right? Like sometimes your shadow comes out. So there's this constant moving process between all of these parts within you. And so in the same way, like as I hear you talking about, like even if you are in the let's say the hierarchy of working on survival, like I still feel like one can access pleasure, one can access, right, a sense of thriving. It doesn't need to be like, okay, here's a step and then you've passed that phase. I don't think it's not linear. It doesn't feel linear to me.
Exactly. Thank you. You just put it clearly. I was struggling with that clarity. Exactly. You can go through that search for safety and still access pleasure. It doesn't have to
Yes.
be linear. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is so important for our culture specifically, because we are still in that area trying to survive every day. So
Yeah.
and I noticed that. I noticed women saying, oh, I can't work with you yet because I don't have time for pleasure. Like if pleasure was a luxury. And I
Yes.
remember myself thinking that as well. Like pleasure is a luxury. But in
Mhm.
reality, pleasure is so necessary to just keep going every day. It's just part of the revolution. It's part of showing up in the world and not letting it crush us.
Right. Pleasure is the revolution, right? When you think about how scarcity has been the dominant paradigm, and that scarcity has had us in competition with one another, in jealousy, in like even just thinking about patriarchy having us in unhealthy relationship dynamics, to be in pleasure and to embrace pleasure as a way of life, regardless of what circumstances you're living in, that is revolutionary. Like you don't have to be famous, you don't have to like be known in the world. This is about you reclaiming your truth. Pleasure is your truth. You know, this is when I watch children develop, they are in pleasure. Everything that they engage in, they engage with that sense of pleasure. Discovering their own body and eating and relating is all pleasure based.
Yes, yes. And I was just going to ask you that to describe pleasure because I think that people have such a different perspective of what pleasure is. We either over sexualize it or
Yes.
we desexualize it, right?
Yes. Yes, and in fact, it's not separate from sexuality, but sexuality has become sexualized. It's become plasticized through pornography and whatnot, and through, of course, like patriarchal perspectives and lenses. But for me, pleasure is about accessing our five or six senses in any given moment, like being in the moment, taking in what is beautiful, what is working, what is right here in front of you. For me, it's a very simple practice. Every day, I'm looking for ways to engage in pleasure. I take a morning walk, and this morning I'm smelling like the lavender and all of the amazing flowers that are blooming right now in Connecticut where I live.
Mm.
And even just going into the shower, and when I soap up my body, I feel my body. I'm connected to my body. I appreciate my body. Sometimes I even put music. Or when I'm sitting here talking to you, I have a candle lit or I have flowers here. So being in the sensuality of life, life is sensual, even when, you know, life feels like you're getting fucked over. There's a beauty in what is emerging, what is getting excavated. For example, in moments where I feel grief, where I'm moving through a lot of difficult emotions. I call them difficult because they're not feelings that, are necessarily like wanted or, we move towards, but for me, grief and feeling all of that, crying, all of that is sensual because it's alive. It's just alive.
Yes, 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 yes. I love that. And as you mentioned that, I think about your first statement about trauma, how trauma is too fast, too much, too soon.
Yes.
And I think that if we use pleasure as a regulation system,
Yes.
we could kind of filter
Yes.
the experience so it's not too fast or too much.
Exactly.
And it's definitely something that we can pace in according to our own pleasure regulating system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that in because that's exactly how I support when we are doing trauma healing work. It is about like pleasure is a way to bring yourself into your body in a way that is safe. For a lot of us, it isn't safe to be in our bodies, right? To be in our full sexuality, it's not safe. But pleasure, the simplicity of pleasure gives us a way to come in. It helps us like calm our nervous systems when we're in overwhelm. It pleasure helps regulate. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is so powerful. And how I love how you mentioned that children live with pleasure. And
Yes.
really, I think that we should do a cleanse about the word pleasure, because this connection of pleasure with pornography, which I think is one of the less pleasurable works like, I'm pretty sure that a very small percentage of porn actors are actually having pleasure while they are filming. So I mean, probably some do, most likely, but I can guarantee that many of them don't. But that's how we are measuring pleasure. We are expecting pleasure to feel like and to sound like something that has to do with exposing our sexuality, being approved, being fuckable, being desirable, and being taken and ravished, and that's not pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, and even thinking about the from a consumerist lens, the way that pleasure has been sold to us is through like amassing things. Oh, I have this, I buy myself this perfume or this makeup or this dress or even chocolates, right? This is how pleasure is sold in commercials, is through consumption, whether it's something you put in your mouth or something you wear on your body.
Yeah. And which goes back to the very basic ways in which we, even as children, feel the world, right? Through our mouth,
Yes.
through the texture of our bodies.
Yes. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, the sensorial world, and for me pleasure is like a mindfulness. I don't like using the word mindfulness because it just focuses on the mind, but it's a mindfulness practice.
Yeah,
It's a way that I feel full in my body. I feel whole in my body through the practice of pleasure. Yeah.
exactly,
And I,
exactly.
and that includes self-pleasure,
Yes,
you know. It includes self-pleasure, so it does include more tangible aspects of sexuality.
yes. And that is something that I had to relearn when I started training. That self pleasure was slower and was not about friction and was not about getting to a point, but it was about feeling in that moment and feeling slowly and gently. And even when you're doing something, then take it a little bit slower now, slow it down a little bit more. And that goes against the way in which we perceive pleasure from the outside in the media, right? Like we see pleasure happening fast and easy, but in reality, pleasure goes
Yes.
slowly and gently because it
Right.
has to be absorbed by our senses.
Yes, yes, and an example that I like to use about how we often miss experiences of pleasure, like you can look at some flowers and think, "Oh, that's pretty," but you are moving way too quickly in order to really look at them and take them in, right? Because that's another step in the process. We do have to slow down and just allow it to affect us, allow ourselves to take it in, breathe it in. What does it feel like in your body to look at these colors or to smell them? What memories come up for you? Do you feel your desire? Like, this is all like this, so much movement happening in the body just from this one simple moment. And often we're moving way too quickly through our lives to even take in a compliment,
Yeah,
right? We often deflect like, "Oh, that's you doing today? Oh, yeah, thanks," and we sort of quickly move away from it. But like, can we take that in? Can we absorb? Can we receive? And what we're talking about with pleasure is about honoring receptive energy,
yeah,
right? The receptive, what people call the feminine. I like to have it be less gender typed, but the receptive energy.
yeah. But then what happens when we do that? And the reason why most people avoid doing that it's because trauma catches up. When we slow
Yes.
down, or when we connect to our body, or when we connect to our sensuality in any shape, trauma catches up. And I
Yes.
think that we have been running away from it for a long time. So um, that's why it's so important, and it always shows up. Like in my work, it shows up constantly. That's something I work with. People don't expect that, and it's like, oh, I just came for the pleasure. Yeah, baby, but you're going to feel the pain. And you're going to love it, because after that comes a lot of pleasure. But I think that's why trauma work is so important, and I really want to discuss that with you, because people feels first of all, people feel that trauma is something that breaks us and brands us, and that if I have trauma, I am kind of broken, and if I have trauma, I am unique and nobody else surely has that trauma. And I really want to normalize the discussion around trauma and the responses to trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I thank you for bringing that in. I just want to say that my belief is that we're all traumatized, and obviously there is a long or large spectrum of how that all can happen. And the reason why a lot of us feel broken in our experiences in our internal world is because trauma does split the self. It does fracture the self. But the trauma healing process is about mending, is about restitching, is about remembering, right? Bringing it back together. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the work, because it's like this brokenness is like this feeling you are already whole,
Yeah.
right? My thing is that you are already whole, and it's just a matter of recapturing that or returning to that. Um, I believe we all get hurt, and again, to different degrees, some worse than others, and as you were saying, like, we're a lot of us are being traumatized right now. Like, there is so much collective trauma. We are witnessing violence in the United States and Mexico and wherever you live. You are witnessing violence through the media or in your neighborhood or in your home. So we are being exposed in real time, in addition to generational things, things that happen in our childhood. So I think that this process of what you talked about, co-regulation, regulation, honoring, like when you slow down, yes, there is all of this feeling that comes up, right? Maybe distress comes up. We need to be able to process that, because our ancestors, even our mothers and certainly our grandmothers, didn't have the luxury to do that work, and I don't want it to be a luxury.
Mhm.
And I'm really grateful to be alive right now, because we have so many resources to work with trauma, to heal trauma. You can watch YouTube videos and learn how to heal your trauma. You can listen to podcasts and learn how to heal your trauma. Like, there are ways. If that's something that you desire, there are so many ways.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, um, the responses, the
Mm,
famous responses for stress, because they are not really just for trauma; they are stress responses.
yes.
Um, I would love to hear, or to mention them. More than to hear, I would love to mention them to the
Yeah.
audience. The stress or trauma responses that we deal with. How would you
Yeah.
describe them?
Yeah. I think like the four basic responses, just to keep it simple, is, fight,
Mhm.
flight, which is usually sort of an anxious moment, freeze when we get stuck, and fawn when we're in appease mode, right? So fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And what I want to say about the freeze state is that we often blame ourselves sometimes for being in freeze states, but Free states are just they're part of our nervous system that is sort of automatic,
Hmm.
and it's just the way that we're programmed. It's just something that happens. It's part of our reptilian brain.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you choose. It's something that just happens in your body.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are the basic. There's other mixed states, but they're not
Mhm.
as important.
And I think they are so important because they are so common and we don't even notice. Like the fighting with people on social media, right?
Yes.
When we get on a fight, it doesn't need to be about punching somebody in the face. It can be just about insulting some stranger or engaging in a discussion for hours on social media because that person has a different political view than yours.
Yes. Sasha, just yesterday I was in like this beautiful um liberation space, and there was a guest speaker that was invited to speak, famous person, and they said a word um that, like, I could feel the ripple in the audience, and this is just all on Zoom. And I didn't have a huge reaction to it, but somebody said something, and then as this discussion began to unfold about the use of certain words and how they trigger people, I could feel the fight response rising up. And in me, I felt my flight. I almost like X'd out, and I
Mhm.
kept telling myself, stay, stay, trust that this will get worked out. But I could feel my own response to wanting to leave, and other people's responses of fight, right? And we all, like, as the speaker leaned in with curiosity and listening, then, right, the collective nervous system was able to calm and then have a discussion from a very different place. But there was all of that fight flight. There's some people who talked in the chat about freezing when
Yeah.
they heard the word. So that this is all happening, as you said, all the time. And we're
Yes.
not really good at tracking it, I'm finding. Like, we're not good at tracking it. I really want nervous system knowledge to be everywhere because it would save us so much conflict and pain.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. That's why I always love to mention the responses because I'm like, oh, you're going through a stress response. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's your body trying to tell you we need to do something to survive. So you just need to remember that you're safe, right? Nobody's going to hurt you right now,
Yes.
right? Or if somebody's going to hurt you, you need to take
Yes.
action. So uh, it's like
Yes.
the phone response. It's like us being nice to people that are trying to. I remember this experience in the. I was much younger, and I was with a friend of mine in a bar, and this man started flirting but very like hard, like just not leaving us a space to move, and we were smiling and laughing, and but we couldn't figure out what to do, and we were just smiling at the silly jokes of that person, but that person just had us kind of against the wall, like we were not finding a way out. So until I figured there was somebody out, and I said, oh, that's my friend, and I took my friend with this man, with another man, and we both sat with him, and he said, oh, I thought you were enjoying the flirting of that guy because you were both laughing. And I was like, no, we were laughing because we were, I didn't know it back then, and I felt guilty for laughing, and I felt like I was actually maybe provoking that flirtatiousness, because that's what people thought. Oh, if that guy thought that I was enjoying that, of course the guy flirting was thinking the same. But now that I know about the stress responses, I know that no, I was just trying to be pleasant for my own sake, so I was
Right.
smiling. But I
Yes.
didn't mean it.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about how most of us grow up with codependency as the norm for relationships. And that's part of the decolonization because I uphold sovereignty as my as sort of the way that I want to exist in relationships and how I want to be in any relationship and in relationship with myself as well. And a lot of that comes with healing codependency and growing up in codependent systems and has a lot of us, especially women, because that's who I work with, has us in a lot of fawn response, a lot of appeasement, especially when we're trying to set boundaries, which are essential,
Mm-hmm.
essential part of the trauma healing process, and the process of coming into our sovereignty. Is we have such a hard time saying this is what I need or this is what I want, right? And bringing it back to the colonization piece, like I never got to say what I needed or what I wanted growing up, right? And a lot of us, like, if you grow up in in collectivist cultures where there is then another layer of codependency, right? And those two things are different. They're not the same things because I love collectivism, but it's not codependency. But a lot of us grow up feeling like collectivism is codependency and vice versa. And so we don't get to say what's good for us because we're thinking about all the other people it's going to affect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I would love to hear more about that term. I had never heard it. And collectivism.
Hmm.
What is it?
Yeah, collectivism is just sort of like, like in 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 Latinx families, right? Is this idea that familismo, right? That we are all interdependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what your actions affect the other person. And, it's all of this sense of like working together and valuing family interrelatedness. And unfortunately, right, that's also imposed upon with right codependence and survival systems and colonialism and how families needed to insulate themselves in order to protect from outsiders. And so
Yeah.
there's ways that can become toxic
Yes.
when if I'd say to my daughter, you can't go out wearing that because what are the neighbors going to say about us? Your behavior reflects badly on the family. How dare you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so that is a way that it can become toxic.
Yeah.
But collectivism in and of itself, I love it. It's just like, yes, recognizing that we are all interrelated and that we do affect one another, right? Even if I don't know you, I may still affect you, right?
Yeah.
In my words and my thoughts and my actions.
And that is so Latino. We do that so much as Latin Americans. We are taught to be very collective, to think about
Yes.
our family system. Like we are moving here,
Yes.
but we're coming together.
Yes, yes.
And you have
Or,
to,
this right, this is your cousin, but we're going to treat him like a brother, like he's part of the family and this is not really your blood relative, but we're going to call him hermano and or hermana. It's just a sense of like, yeah, the sense of like, in Puerto Rico we say si come uno come dos, right? Like
uh
what is just one more person to feed? There's enough food for everybody.
here in Merida, where I'm living at, you see those black points there.
Yeah.
Uh, well, there are these black thingies. They are for hammocks. All houses are made in a way that you can hang hammocks to receive more people. So you just add another hammock.
Love it. I love it. I want those installed in my house.
Here, all houses have them, but it's funny because they even do in the living room because they expect that like the more traditional families in here, you can have a small house with 17 people in because they would just start adding hammocks. And even my husband, who comes from a very traditionally Mexican family, because of course Mexico has everything, right? We have mestizos and we have but people that are more from pueblo, more traditional,
Yeah.
uh, they are even more like that. So he has a saying that says, from one wall to another, everything is a bed. So you can lie anywhere in the floor.
I love that. I love that so much. I love hammocks.
Me too. That's the difference between the center of Mexico. In the center of Mexico, we just use petate, which is just something made with leaves, and you put it on the floor. And here we use the hammocks because the bugs are pretty intense. But the thing is how there is this sense of collectiveness, very indrawn in our culture. And yes, it can be an impulse because your family has your back, differently from the USA where people can lose everything and live in the street. You know
Yes.
that if somebody is in trouble, they are going to end up living with a cousin here. Like
Yes.
nobody's
Exactly.
going to live in the street if you can avoid it.
Exactly.
But the bad news is that it can actually be very limiting because some families can be very toxic because there is a lot of unresolved trauma in many families.
Absolutely. And when you, yeah, when you think about how collective trauma moves, affects a family, right? And it is transmitted through parenting practices,
Yes.
right? That is how collective trauma is transferred through generations, is through our parenting practices. Even the way, for example, how, I hear a lot when I was working with um, Puerto Rican women and Dominican women, I heard a lot about like the differential treatment between boys and girls in the family.
Yeah.
Oh, the boys are, very close to the mother, and the girls are sort of like, yes, well, you clean up the table. They were treated like servants in the home, and those are like more traditional Puerto Rican families, or from the countryside,
Mhm.
pueblo, as you say.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all comes from colonialism, that comes from patriarchy. That's all how the systems live within us, and then get transmitted through our interactions with our partners and our children.
Yes, totally. And I mean, we could have a whole conversation about
Yeah.
family systems and
Yes.
epigenetics and family transmitted trauma. That's one of that was my very first approach to trauma because I felt like I needed to overcome a lot of family issues in order to actually find myself.
Yeah.
But that would take us another hour.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It has
Yeah.
been so beautiful to have you in this space. And I just really want to invite people, and I would like for you to tell us a little bit about that, to your both your container and to work with you one on one. You
Yes.
have nowadays programs to work with people for
Yeah.
6 months. Shh, dog. I'm sorry for the dog barking. That just keeps it real. It's my neighbor's dog. Uh, but you have a 6 month container, right?
Yes.
For
Yes.
working with you one on one. We made an exchange. I coached her on JDeck, and she coached me for some sessions, and it
Yes.
was so magical, so beautiful. So um, I can really recommend you the work with Isha because she does this thing that is so powerful with trauma work, that it's slow, gentle, and slow, and like slow, it takes it further. It doesn't have to be about crying for hours and kicking and screaming. You can just go gentle, little by little. And she does that. She contains this space in such a masterful way. So and I would really love to hear where they can find you.
Yes. So my website is www.revolutionaryrompereglas.com. My 6-month one-on-one container is called Devotion, and it really is about devoting yourself to your inner child, all your energetic system, devotion to your boundaries, really about accessing your full life force in service of your leadership. And it's through like intimacy healing, all of this stuff. And then I offer like short term stuff at a lower cost. For example, my 3 session align journey is, if you're feeling stuck in a particular place in your life, it's a little bit of a lower price. It's a shorter commitment. It's just 3 sessions. And that is just for like, for anyone. Um, and then I have my online community, which I love so much. It's a small and intimate online community for, I serve healers, change makers, bridge builders, connectors, the people who really care about making a difference in the world, and recognizing that a lot of us have, like, the people who really care. I often find that, we have a lot of trauma to work through, and this is sort of like what we came in these bodies into this lifetime to do, is to heal ourselves and to bring ourselves in service to the collective. And so this is a space where we have, coaching twice a month. We have a Latinx coaching group, a group. It's basically like Facebook for Rompereglas. And we
Yeah.
have another Black affinity healing space. So and we practice pleasure in there. This is like my favorite place to be, honestly. We practice like expressing our sexuality and just having fun, and bragging the amazing steps that we're taking towards our, like, embracing our wholeness, and or honoring the wholeness that already is. So
Mm.
those are the ways to work with me. My online container isn't, the community opens up twice a year, but I think that in September I will be opening it up permanently, and having people just come in without needing to sort of just open and close it, but just to leave it open for anyone who wants to come in.
That's amazing. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I will be adding the links to the conversation, to the description of the call, so that people can just click. And thank you so much for this
Yeah.
beautiful conversation. Please share with us, guys, what you think about this conversation. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.